Imagine two kids, both given the exact same modality, difficult puzzle. One of them gets stuck, frowns, and says something like, I love a challenge. The other gets stuck, looks impressed, and quietly gives up, saying something closer to, I guess I'm just not smart enough for this. Same puzzle, same difficult, completely different internal experience, and according to the researcher we are covering today, the difference in reaction predicts an enormous amount about how far each of those kids will go up. Not because one is smarter, but because of something happening in underneath the surface, what they believe about where ability actually comes from. That researcher is Dweck, a psychologist who spent decades studying this exact split, and the book that came out of that research is called Mindset. Her core discovery is that people tend to operate from one of two underlying belief systems about talent and intelligence, what she calls a fixed mindset or a growth mindset, and which one you default to shapes everything from how you handle failure to how you respond to criticism to whether you keep trying after you hit a wall. By the end of this episode, you will be able to spot both mindsets in yourself in real time, understand exactly why the fixed mindset feels so protective in the moment while quietly limiting you long term, and walk away with concrete ways to shift toward growth, especially in the areas of your life where you have been most afraid to fail. A little background first, because this book is unusual among popular psychology books in that it's built on decades of authors' own controlled research, not just observation or anecdotes. Dweck is a psychologist whose research career has focused heavily on motivation, achievements, and how people respond to failure. Much of her early foundational work involved studying how children respond to difficulty or setbacks, including a well-known series of studies where researchers watched how different kids reacted to a puzzle they couldn't solve. Some treating is an exciting challenge, and others treating it as a verdict on their own worth. What sets her work apart is that it's not just a philosophy or a motivational framework. It's grounded in experimental research, including studies where researchers could actually shift someone's mindset with a brief intervention and then measure real, downstream changes in behavior and performance. That's part of why this book has had such staying power in fields well beyond psychology, education, sports and coaching, corporate training, because the underlying claim is not just inspirational, it's testable, and it's held up reasonably well under scrutiny, more so than many popular psychology ideas. Let's define the two core concepts precisely, because a lot of casual references to growth mindset in modern workplaces and schools have drifted pretty far from what Dweck actually means. A fixed mindset is the underlying belief that qualities like intelligence, talent, and ability are essentially fixed traits. You either have them or you don't, and while you may get slightly better at using what you have through practice, and the fundamental calling on your ability was set up above and is not going to meaningfully move. A growth mindset is the underlying belief that abilities are things that can be developed over time through effort, good strategies, and input from others, meaning your current level of ability is a starting point, not fixed ceiling, and setbacks are simply part of the process of developing further rather than evidence of some permanent limitation. Dweck is careful to point out that these are not rich, all or nothing personality types you are permanently assigned to. Most people cry a mix of both mindsets, and which one activates often depends on the specific domain. You may have strong growth mindset about your ability to learn a new skill at work while carrying a deeply fixed about something like your statistic talent or your athletic ability, an area you decided long ago you were just not good at. The reason this distinction matters so much practically is that it shapes an entire chain of downstream behavior. If you believe ability is fixed, then every difficult task becomes, on some level, a test of whether you have it, and that framing makes failure feel like devastating proof of a permanent limitation, which makes people a fixed mindset avoid challenges, give up more easily when things get hard, feel threatened by other people's success, and often ignore useful negative feedback because it feels like an attack on their identity rather than useful information. If you believe ability is developable, failure gets reframed as data about your current strategy or effort level, not a verdict on your inherent worth, which makes people with a growth mindset more likely to seek our challenge, persist through setbacks, learn from criticism instead of avoiding it, and find genuine inspiration rather than threat in other people's success. In a fixed mindset, failure tends to get perceived as an identity threat rather than an event. If you believe your intelligence is a fixed quantity, then failing at something intellectually demanding doesn't not just mean this attempt didn't work. It can feel like it's revealing the true, limited size of your fixed intelligence, which is much scarier and a more personal interpretation. It's part of why people in a strongly fixed mindset often avoid situations where they may fail publicly, even when those situations would actually be the fastest route to genuine improvement. The short-term protection of their self-image gets prioritized over the long-term benefit of the challenge. In a growth mindset, failure gets processed more like a data point about a specific strategy, a specific effort level, or a specific set of skills that haven't been developed yet, none of which threatens your sense of your own underlying worth or potential, because that potential was never assumed to be fixed or fully revealed by any single attempt in the first place. Dweck's research found that people operating from a growth mindset, when they hit setback, were more likely to actually increase their efforts and try new strategies afterward, while people in a fixed mindset were more likely to disengage entirely or make excuses that protect their self-image at the cost of actual improvement. There's a particularly striking finding from her research involving academically capable students who, after facing an unexpected failure, actually became more likely to lie about their scores to peers if they held a fixed mindset, not because they were dishonest people generally, but because the failure felt so threatening to their identity that protecting the image of being smart, bravely, overweighted telling the truth. That's a vivid illustration of just how high the emotional stakes of failure become when your underlying belief system threats ability as a fixed identity defining trait rather than a developing skill. In a well-known series of studies, children who completed a task were given one of two types of prize. Some were told something like, "You're so smart," prize directed at their innate ability, while others were told something like, "You worked really hard on that," prize directed at their effort and process. Afterward, the kids were given a choice between an easier task they would likely to succeed at or a harder one they would likely struggle with. The kids prized for ability overwhelmingly those the easier task, protecting their smart level, while the kids prized for effort were significantly more likely to choose the harder, more challenging task because their self-image was not tied to a fixed trait that a difficult task may threaten. The pattern continued when both groups were then given a genuinely difficult task and allowed it to fail. The ability prized kids showed less enjoyment, more frustration, and a drop in subsequent performance even on easier tasks afterward. The failure seemed to shake their confidence broadly. The effort prized kids maintained more enjoyment, treated the difficulty as normal and interesting rather than threatening, and their subsequent performance didn't suffer the same way. The practical implication here reshaped how a lot of parents, teachers, and coaches think about feedback. Well-intentioned praise aimed at innate talent, "You are so gifted, you are natural," can actually backfire by reinforcing a fixed mindset, making persons more fragile in the face of future difficulty rather than more confident. Praise aimed at effort, strategy, and process. "I like how you kept trying different approaches. Your persistence really paid off there, reinforces a growth mindset and tends to build more durable resilience motivation, especially through the setbacks that are inevitable in any meaningfully difficult pursuit. In a fixed mindset applied to relationships, there is often an underlying belief that romantic compatibility, friendship quality, or relational skill is something you either have or don't, meaning conflict or difficulty in relationship can feel like evidence that the relationship or other people in it are fundamentally wrong or for each other rather than a normal, workable part of any long-term relationship that requires skill and effort to navigate. In growth mindset applied to relationships, difficulty and conflict gets interrupted instead as a normal part of any relationship that can be worked through and improved with communication effort and better strategies. The relationship is not assumed to be either perfectly compatible or fundamentally broken. It's assumed to be a developing thing, the same way a skill develops. Dweck's research suggests fixed mindset. Thinking about relationships is associated with less constructive conflict resolution and greater tendency to give up on a relationship at the first sign of real difficulty, treating friction as a proof of incompatibility rather than something workable. This extends beyond romantic relationships too. She found similar patterns in how people approach friendships, family relationships, and even relationships with themselves, in the form of self-compassion versus harsh self-judgment after personal mistake or shortcoming. Dweck examined leaders or organizational cultures through the same fixed versus growth lens. In a fixed mindset organizational culture, there is often an implicit belief that talent is something you hire for rather than develop, which tends to create environments where employees hide mistakes, avoid visible risk-taking, and compete with each other to look smart rather than to genuinely improve, because visible struggle feels dangerous to their perceived status within a culture that treats ability as fixed and immediately judged. In a growth mindset organizational culture, mistakes are treated as expected, useful information rather than as impressments to hide, and employees are more willing to take on visibly difficult challenges, ask for help, and give each other honest feedback because of the underlying assumption is that everyone, including leadership, is still developing rather than having already arrived at the same fixed final level of ability. Dweck also discusses a specific leadership trap she calls a pitfall of the genius leader executives who built their identity and reputation around being uniquely, innately brilliant, who often become more resistant to feedback and more prone to surrounding themselves with people who won't challenge them, precisely because the challenge threatens the fixed, exceptional identity they have built their leadership persona around. Contrast that with leaders who see their own abilities as still developing, who tend to build cultures with more urban mindset and more honest feedback flowing up, and ultimately, according to the her research, but long-term organizational outcomes. I wanted to spend a moment on a correction Dweck herself has made repeatedly in an interviews later writing because growth mindset has become such a widely used phrase that its meaning has drifted sometimes into something close to implicit positive thinking, which is not what she actually argues. A growth mindset is not the belief that effort alone guarantees success, or that everyone has exactly equal underlying potential in every domain. It's specifically the belief that ability can be developed through effort, good strategies, and input from others, which means effort without an effective strategy or without acting on a feedback does not automatically produce a growth mindset outcome either. Dweck has been explicit that simply pricing effort that's not actually leading anywhere, or treating growth mindset as a slogan you announce rather than a belief that changes how you actually respond to real difficulty, misses the entire point of the research. She's also pushed back against what she's called false growth mindset, people who claim to have adapted the framework but who still panic, blame others, or give up at the first sign of real failure, essentially using the language of growth mindset as a fixed mindset defense mechanism in disguise. The real marker of growth mindset in how framing is not what someone says about themselves, it's how they actually behave in the specific moment right after something goes wrong. Dweck research here is genuinely encouraging. In a controlled studies, brief interventions, sometimes as short as single session, teaching people that intelligence and ability are more malleable than they assume it, produced measurable downstream changes in a behavior, including how students responded to academic setbacks months later. That's a meaningful finding because it suggests mindset is not a deep, unchangeable personality trait. It's closer to a belief that can be directly taught, examined, and shifted within the right kind of exposure and practice. That said, choose carefully to know that shifting a mindset is not usually a single dramatic realization that permanently sticks. It tends to work more like building a habit than flipping a switch. You notice a fixed mindset reaction, you consciously choose a growth-oriented frame. You consciously choose the growth-oriented reframe instead, and you repeat the noticing and reframing processes enough times that it gradually becomes more automatic. This is a part of why she recommends people think of their fixed mindset reactions almost as a separate internal voice or persona. Some readers of the book find it useful to literally name that voice so they can notice when it's talking and conscientiously respond to it, rather than fusing with it as though it were simply an objective neural description of reality. There is also an important caution here about self-honesty. Dweck warns against a kind of self-congratulatory trap where people become so attached to the identity of having a growth mindset that admitting a fixed mindset reaction to status to feel embracing in its own right, which is ironically itself a fixed mindset response, treating having a growth mindset as a fixed personal trait to protect rather than an ongoing practice with inevitable lapses. The healthier framing she recommends is to accept fixed mindset reactions, to keep showing up, especially under stress or in your most identity-sensitive domains, and to treat noticing them without shame as the actual skill being practiced, not evidence that the whole framework has failed you. Let's make this concrete. Say you are learning a new skill at work, public speaking for example, and you just gave a talk that didn't go well. Notice, the fixed mindset reaction is fast, because it's usually the automatic, fast response, a flash of thought like, I guess I'm just not a good public speaker, treating the one bad talk as revealed permanent truth about your fixed ability. Deliberately reframe using the growth lens instead as what specific part of the talk didn't land pacing, structure, nervous, and treat that as a solvable strategy problem rather than an identity verdict. Watch how you respond to feedback afterward. If a colleague offers a specific critique, notice whether you insist to defend yourself and explain it away, or to actually absorb it as a useful information and consciously choose the second option even if the first one feels safer in the moment. Apply the price lesson to yourself rather than telling yourself I'm just bad at this. Tell yourself something closer to what Dweck's research found actually builds resilience. I put in real effort and I'm still figuring out the right approach, which keeps the door open for improvements instead of closing it. Choose the harder version next time. On purpose, the same way the effort-priced kids in high studies choose the more challenging task. Deliberately volunteer for another speaking opportunity soon, rather than avoiding the discomfort, because avoidance is the fixed mindset favorite move, and it's exactly the move that prevents the skill from developing. That's the entire framework applied to one realistic, uncomfortable, very relatable scenario. Let's bring it home. A fixed mindset treats ability as a static trait you either have or don't. A growth mindset treats ability as something developed through effort, strategy, and feedback. Most people carry both mindsets activated differently depending on the specific domain. You can have a growth mindset at work and a fixed mindset about something else entirely. Failure feels like an identity threat in a fixed mindset and like useful data in a growth mindset, which shapes whether setbacks lead to disengagements or increased effort. Praising innate talent tends to reinforce a fixed mindset and increase fragility, pricing effort, strategy, and the process tends to build more resilient growth mindset. The same framework applies to relationships and organizational culture, not just individual achievements. Fixed mindset cultures hide mistakes. Growth mindset cultures treat them as information. Genuine growth. A genuine growth mindset is not simple positive thinking or a slogan. It's measured by how you actually behave in the moment right after something goes wrong. If this episode helped you catch your own fixed mindset reactions in real time, share it with someone who has been avoiding a challenge purely to protect the image of being the smart one. That protection has a real cost, and it is usually invisible until you name it. Subscribe for more of these deep dives